Hi guys, in this session we are going to go over functions in JavaScript. Why do we have it, why do we use it, and what for? Let's go and explore that. So let's say I have a variable x is equals to 2 into 3. Very much possible. I have another variable y is equals to 3 into 4. Similarly, I can have any such variable declared with different parameters. Now, this is very boring to type in the numbers every time, and especially if the logic gets really complicated. Let's say if the logic gets whatever is the answer 2 into 3, I need to multiply it again. So let's say I have this 2 into 3 and plus 2 into 3, whatever the numbers were passed, the sum of that. Now, if I have to do this every time, it gets confusing. So what I can do is I can write a small function. And what does a function do? A function is nothing but just a block of code that is designed to perform a particular action when it is invoked. So a function is basically executed when something invokes it or something calls it. And we have seen it in a previous session where we used a method called myFunction, and then we called it using myFunction parentheses. Let's try to write a quick function for this and see what happens. So let's do a function. So whenever you write a function, it has to start with the keyword function, then the name of the function. Let's say I want it to be named as my function. Again, the naming convention for writing a function is the same as that of a variable, as we discussed. So we start with the name of the function with a smaller letter, and then it follows the camel case. Then it has something called as a parameter, which is a p1, p2, and so on and so forth. So you decide how many parameters your function can accept. And then we have the block of code, which is the quotes. So the moment you have the quotes, you know that the particular logic will be executed when you invoke that function. Now let's try to put this same function to use for our use, which is this. So I have a number 1, which is called number 1. Then I have a number 2, which is called a number 2. I don't need a number 3 because I can do a sum of it. So I don't need another parameter. Now let's try to do it. We'll do a variable a is equals to number 1 into number 2. And variable b is equals to number 1 plus number 2. We are expecting a result out of this function. So let's try to return a plus b, where a is 2 into 3 and b is 2 plus 3, and then put a semicolon. Now if we run this, let's put the console on and put the output off. Let's try to run. Nothing will happen because we are not outputting anything onto the screen, and we are not even invoking this function. So how do we invoke this function? We invoke this function by calling myFunction, and we pass in the values 2 and 3, and that's how we invoke the function. Now you can invoke the function before or after the function is called. Let's try to put, instead of doing return, let's try to console.log the answer and see what happens. You see 11 and 11, which is 2 into 3, 6 plus 5. And both of them got executed one after the other. Similarly, you can return the answer from a function. When I do a return, this function will return me a value, and I can store that in a variable. Let's say result is equals to my value. Now let's try to do a console log of my result. Let's clear the console and run. I get 11 as an output. So that was a very basic example of functions. So time for some nomenclature. A function will always start with the function keyword. A function will have a function name. A function will have a set of parameters, and the list depends on how you define your own function. A function will have a return value. A function can return something to the caller of this function. Now, in this scenario, it is returning a variable of result, which is an integer to result. You can output this. Now, by writing this function, what have we achieved? We can have another variable result2, where we can have my function passed two values, which is 3, 4. Now in this scenario, we can get the answer for the new variables or the new parameters that we gave in. Did you see what we did out here? 11 and 19. Now, by writing a function, we avoided writing the same piece of code again and again for both our execution. Yes, that's another particular feature that you need a function for. Functions help you reuse code. You can define the code once and use it many times. You can use the same code many times with different arguments to produce different results. You can also use functions as variables. What do I mean by that? So rather than storing this into a result 2, what if I directly console logged this particular item? Let's try and see the result if the answer is still 19. And yes, the answer is 19. So you can use a function as good as a variable function to Celsius, and I can pass in the Fahrenheit out here as f, one of the parameters, and then I can do the computation by doing a return 5 divided by 9, which is what the formula for conversion is, into the Fahrenheit that I have, minus 32, and this should be in another bracket. Now whenever I call this console.log, let's put the temperature is, let's close the quotes, let's put the variable to Celsius, and let's do the outside temperature right now is 70 for me, so let's try and do 70. Let's try and see what this brings us to the screen. The temperature is 21 degrees. Similarly, you can change the value of this 70 to, let's say, 60 degrees and then run it again. The temperature becomes 15 degrees Celsius. So that was easy, wasn't it? And you could reuse this Celsius function again and again.